Hey everybody, welcome to the digestive system. And here we are looking at the digestive system. But before we start talking about all the different parts and pieces, I want to make clear what the overall goal is. And the overall goal of the digestive system is to make nutrients in food available to the cells of the body. And there's two very important digestive processes that need to occur for this to happen. One of those is digestion, and the other is absorption. Now, when we're talking about digestion, we're talking about the chemical breakdown of nutrients into small enough units that are able to move from the digestive tract into the blood. And this is going to occur by molecules that we call enzymes. So it's the chemical breakdown of nutrients. And there's three major macronutrients that the digestive system is going to need to digest. One of those is carbohydrates, the other is lipids, and the third that we're looking at down below are proteins. And proteins are made up of individual amino acids that are held together by strong chemical bonds that are specifically covalent bonds. And so it's going to be the job of these enzymes to chemically break these down. So what they're going to do is the enzymes are going to come along and they're going to break the chemical bonds that hold these amino acids together. And eventually what that's going to do is it's going to free up individual amino acids. And that takes us to absorption. And absorption refers to the actual movement of these digested nutrients from the digestive tract into the blood. So when proteins are moving down through the digestive tract, that's too large of a molecule to move across the digestive tract lining and into the blood. So what we do is we digest it, and we digest it into these individual amino acids. And once that happens, that allows for absorption to occur. These individual amino acids are small enough where they can move across the digestive tract wall into the blood. And that's the overall goal of the digestive system, is to take nutrients in food and move those into the blood. And why is that important? Why do we want to move nutrients into the blood? Why do we want nutrients in the blood? And the answer to that is that once nutrients are in the blood, they have access to all of the cells of the body. And what that does is it allows the cells to take these nutrients from the blood and move them into the cell, and then use those nutrients to perform whatever cellular function they're going to use them to perform. So there are two main components of the digestive system, and one of those is the alimentary canal. And the alimentary canal is the long continuous tube that runs from the mouth all the way down to the anus. And all sorts of digestive activities are going to occur as food passes down this tube. Some other names that we give to the alimentary canal include the digestive tract, the gastrointestinal tract, or also the gut. These are all referring to this long continuous tube. So let's go through and just look at the different parts of this tube. And it starts up here at the mouth or the oral cavity. In back of the oral cavity, we have the throat or the pharynx. The throat gives way to the next component, which is this long tube that runs down the thoracic cavity. That's the esophagus. After the esophagus, it passes through the diaphragm into the abdominal cavity. And we have the stomach. After the stomach, we get into the small intestines, and there's 3 different parts to the small intestine. The first component, I'll try to indicate it right up there, is the duodenum or the duodenum. And then I'll just kind of generally mark these areas. But after the duodenum, we have an area in here, which is the jejunum. And then after the jejunum, we have this other component of the small intestines, and that's the ileum. After the small intestine, we have the large intestine, and there are different parts to the large intestine. The first component is called the cecum. Running out of colors here, let's see. And then we have, after the cecum, we have the largest part of the large intestine, which is called the colon. We have the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, and then it takes a little S shape and it moves posteriorly, and that's the sigmoid colon. And then after the colon, we have the rectum and also the anus. So that's the alimentary canal. The other part of the digestive system are what we call the accessory digestive organs. And these are organs that are going to contribute to digestive processes, but they're not part of the alimentary canal itself. So let's take a look at these different accessory digestive organs. We have the tongue and the teeth, salivary glands, the liver and gallbladder, and also the pancreas. These are all the accessory digestive organs. And the tongue and the teeth are kind of the exception, but when we consider all of the other remaining accessory digestive organs, the salivary glands, liver, gallbladder, and pancreas, they all kind of have a common theme, a common function. And what they have in common is that they all lie outside of the alimentary canal. And they're all going to produce digestive secretions, and then they're going to secrete those products into the alimentary canal. And those secretions are going to help with digestive processes. So for instance, here we have the salivary glands. And there are 3 of them on each side of the face. We have the parotid gland, the sublingual gland, and the submandibular gland. These are all salivary glands, and they all lie outside of the alimentary canal, in this case, outside of the oral cavity. And what they're going to do is they're going to produce saliva. And that saliva is going to travel via ducts and it's going to be secreted inside of the oral cavity. And that saliva has several functions, but one of them is it has digestive enzymes in it that are going to start breaking down carbohydrates. So that's a good example of what these accessory digestive organs do. They're located outside the alimentary canal. They're going to produce products, and they're going to secrete those products into the alimentary canal, and those products are going to contribute to digestive processes. And this is a good example about what these accessory digestive organs do. And let's take a look at the pancreas. So here we have the pancreas down in the abdominal cavity. And to orient ourselves, here is the first part of the small intestine, which is the duodenum. So the duodenum is part of the alimentary canal itself. And then we have the pancreas that is located outside of the alimentary canal. But what the pancreas is going to do is it's going to produce digestive secretions that we collectively call pancreatic juice. And that pancreatic juice is going to be secreted into the pancreatic duct, and then it's going to be secreted, that pancreatic juice, into the duodenum. So the pancreas is located outside of the alimentary canal, but it produces digestive secretions that are going to be secreted into the alimentary canal and contribute to the digestive processes. And pancreatic juice is critically important for the digestion of all of the major nutrient classes. And this figure really sums up everything that we've talked about so far. So let's orient ourselves first of all. And we find ourselves in the lumen of the small intestine. The lumen is just the hollow space within a tube. It's the empty space that the food is going to pass through. So we're in the lumen of the small intestine. And what nutrient do we have traveling down the small intestine? We have a protein traveling down there. And this protein is made up of individual amino acids that are held together by chemical bonds, by covalent bonds. And what we want to do is we want to digest that protein. We want to break it down into small enough units that it can move into the blood. And how are we going to do that? Well, that's the job of enzymes. And there's two sets of enzymes that are going to be responsible for digesting the protein. One are what we call these pancreatic proteases, and the other are what we call these brush border enzymes. And where are these pancreatic proteases? They're in the lumen of the small intestine, but where did they come from? Well, they came from the pancreas. They were produced in the pancreas. They're part of the pancreatic juice, and then that pancreatic juice is secreted through the pancreatic duct into the lumen of the small intestine. So this is a good example of the contribution of an accessory digestive organ, a contribution of the pancreas in this case. And what these enzymes are going to do is they're going to break the chemical bonds that are holding these amino acids together. And what that does is it frees up individual amino acids. And the reason that's important is because amino acids are small enough to move from the digestive tract across the digestive tract lining and into the blood, which is what absorption is. So I just showed you digestion of the protein, digesting it into individual amino acids, and now we need to absorb it. Now we need to move it into the blood. And this is kind of a complicated process. We don't need to get into the details right now. But basically what's happening is this amino acid moves across the lining of the small intestine, and then it makes its way into the blood. Get it better. So there we have the amino acid that moved across the digestive lining into the blood. And that's the whole goal, because the goal of the digestive system is to take nutrients and get them into the blood. This is kind of a side note, but it's worth mentioning. So there's so much going on in the abdominal pelvic cavity with regards to these digestive organs that it's helpful from a medical perspective to be able to divide it into different sections. And one of the ways you can do that is divide it into quadrants. divided into 4 different sections. And that's what we're looking at in this figure. The upper boundary is the diaphragm. The lower boundary is the bottom of the pelvis, maybe the pubic symphysis area. And then this all intersects at the navel, at the belly button. And then from this point, like I said, we can divide it into quadrants. And in this figure, we're looking at an anterior view of the patient. And so the way we name these quadrants is in reference to the patient. And so this up here is going to be the right upper quadrant. It's the right upper quadrant of the patient. Below it is going to be the right lower quadrant. And then on the other side, you're going to have the left upper quadrant and the left lower quadrant. And why would we do this? Why is it helpful to divide the abdominopelvic cavity up into these 4 different areas? Well, it's helpful because we know the organs that are located in each of these quadrants. And if we have a patient that comes in that points to pain in one of these quadrants, then that gives us an idea of, for instance, what might be causing the problem. For instance, up here at the right upper quadrant, what are some organs in the right upper quadrant, or what might some issues be if somebody expressed pain or discomfort in the right upper quadrant? Well, there you have the gallbladder, and so it's possible that maybe they have some gallstones up there in the right upper quadrant. What could be going on in the right lower quadrant that could be causing problems? What's that little appendage right there? That's the appendix. And in fact, if somebody is pointing to severe discomfort and pain coming from that right lower quadrant, that you should probably tell them to go to the emergency room because there's a good chance that they may have appendicitis. Up here in the upper left quadrant, there's a large portion of the stomach that's up there. And then, down in the left lower quadrant, we have some different parts of the colon. We have the descending colon and also the sigmoid colon, among others. So this is the main bit of material that I wanted to cover today, and that's the structure of the alimentary canal or the structure of the digestive tract. If you took a cross-section anywhere along the digestive tract, anywhere from the oral cavity down to the anus, you would find that it's composed of the same 4 layers. So there's 4 layers that make up the digestive tract all the way from the oral cavity down to the anus. So let's start by identifying the lumen. And the lumen is an open channel within a tube. It's the hollow space within a tube. And with the digestive tract, this is the hollow space that the food is going to pass through. So all of that hollow space represents the lumen. And then the 4 layers of the alimentary canal are going to stack on top of that. So the layer of the alimentary canal in direct contact with the lumen is the mucosa. And the mucosa is going to have a really important role because it is in direct exposure to the lumen. The digestive tract is an open body cavity at the mouth and the anus. And so pathogens, especially pathogens that are on food, are going to travel down that lumen, and the mucosa is going to be the first layer of defense to try to prevent those pathogens from getting inside the body. So this area right there represents the mucosa. And the first layer that actually lines the lumen is a layer of epithelium. So this is the immediate barrier between the lumen and the body. On top of that then is a layer of loose connective tissue, specifically a relar tissue, and the special name that we give to that connective tissue that supports the epithelium is the lamina propria. And then lastly, and we're not going to talk about this layer a whole lot, on top of that is a small little layer of smooth muscle that's going to be involved in agitating the contents of the lumen. That's the muscularis mucosa. But again, we're going to focus on the epithelium, which is in direct contact with the lumen, and the support connective tissue on top of that epithelium. On top of the mucosa is the submucosa. And this is the submucosa right there. And the submucosa is loose connective tissue. Specifically, it's a relar tissue. And there's a lot of vessels that are going to travel through the submucosa to find their way to different parts of the digestive tract. Then on top of the submucosa, we have a couple layers of smooth muscle that we collectively call the muscularis externa. And that there is the muscularis externa. And there's actually a couple different layers of the muscularis externa. And the first is what we call the intercircular layer. And it's called that because the smooth muscle cells run in a circular direction around the lumen. And then on top of that, we have the outer longitudinal layer. And it's called that because the smooth muscle cells are running longitudinally. They're running lengthwise down the length of the digestive tract. And the movement of food within the digestive tract, back and forth within the digestive tract, down the digestive tract, is going to occur because of this muscularis externa. And lastly, we have the serosa. This is the serosa right there. And all the serosa is it's a thin layer of tissue that represents the outer lining of the digestive tract organs. It's the outer lining of the digestive tract. Now let's see if we can identify these four layers in different organs of the alimentary canal. So here we're looking at two different cross sections. Here we have a cross section of the esophagus. And here we have a cross section of the small intestine. And in both of these areas, we're going to find all four layers of the alimentary canal that we just talked about. But what's going to happen is that based on your location, some of these layers are going to be more pronounced, or they're going to be modified just to suit that organ's function. So let's see if we can identify the four layers in each of these. Let's start with the esophagus. So first of all, there's the lumen of the esophagus, and the layer of the alimentary canal that lines the lumen is the mucosa. We're going to talk about the specifics of the mucosa, but I'll go ahead and just point it out for now. This is the epithelial component of the mucosa. And then we have some underlying connective tissue that's hard to identify the boundaries of, but it's probably about there. So this entire area there represents the mucosa, roughly. Beyond that, we have the submucosa, and the submucosa is loose connective tissue. And that's what that is. That's the submucosa. We have some submucosal glands in the submucosa that are going to produce mucus and secrete that into the lumen. Then we have the muscularis externa. And the main job of the esophagus is to propel that food bolus from the neck all the way down to the stomach. And that's going to be accomplished by the muscularis externa. And these are really strong, powerful, what we call peristaltic waves. And so we're going to have thick muscle layers in the muscularis externa. And this band right there, that represents the inner circular layer. So you can imagine there's circular smooth muscle cells that are wrapping around the lumen. And then after that, this is the outer longitudinal layer. And if we were to have a close-up view, you would see little cross sections of smooth muscle cells because those muscle cells are running longitudinally and they just got cut by this cross section. So this entire area right here represents the muscularis externa. And then finally, the very outer edge or the lining of the esophagus is the serosa. And it's really thin, but that's part of it right there. And there may be a little underlying connective tissue below it. But the point is, it's just this outer lining that represents the serosa. Now let's look at the small intestine. First off, here's the lumen. This is the open channel that the food's going to pass through. And the lumen, the layer of the alimentary canal that lines the lumen, again, is the mucosa. And the mucosa in the small intestine is highly modified. It has these finger-like projections that we call villi. So the mucosa in this instance is running all the way right about there. That all represents the mucosa. The submucosa in this instance, the next layer is the submucosa, and that's that area right there. And then we get into the muscularis externa. And it's tough to differentiate the two layers of the muscularis externa in this histology, but that represents the inner circular layer. Then there is a little outer longitudinal layer. So in this case, the inner circular layer is much more pronounced than the outer longitudinal layer. And then again, just this outer lining represents the serosa.